Good evening. Good evening. As you are getting ready for this concert, we still have some people coming in and we're kind of short on seating. So if you have room in your pew to slide into the middle a little bit and make some room on the edges, that would be appreciated so we can get everybody in the sanctuary. Thank you very much.
Good evening. It's lovely to see a full place, and I hope that our first piece, The Spirit of Christmas, helps you to kind of get into the moment and enjoy some wonderful holiday music with us today. That first piece by Peter Graham, a very well-known composer in the brass band world, a name that we come back to time and time again. Our next piece, I think you will recognize, little different setting, but we hope you will enjoy Good King Wenceslas. Our next selection has a little history in my family. If you've been to either our concert or Massanutten Brass Band's concert for the holidays, you may have heard this next one. It's a lovely, somewhat of a lullaby. We first were introduced to it through the Davis family, and I'm glad to see them here tonight. It was a Christmas Eve, I think, at our church, And we had the mother and her 3 daughters get up to sing, and it was so lovely. And it has stuck in our hearts, so we kind of fight over the piece ever since in terms of who's playing it. We currently have one of the granddaughters of that at the time, the mom, back in the percussion section. We've had one of their children back in the tuba, tenor horn, so I don't know, we need another Davis person up here at some point. I'm going to read just a little bit of the opening. I'm not going to read all the words, but just to help you perhaps get in the mood of this lovely piece. How do you capture the wind on the water? How do you count all the stars in the sky? How can you measure the love of a mother? Or how can you write down a baby's first cry? Candlelight, angel light, firelight, and star glow shine on his cradle till breaking of dawn. Gloria in excelsis Deo. So I hope you'll enjoy Candlelight Carol. Didn't do it intentionally, but I guess I kind of sandwiched the beginning and the end of our program with a couple brass band composer favorites. So you started out with Peter Graham, and we're going to end with Paul Levitt Cooper. I think you'll enjoy this as well. It takes a lot to bring students from so many different settings together for 5 rehearsals to make this happen. So I have some people who are just wonderful that I want to thank before our final piece. First of all, I want to say thank you to all of these musicians up here. We have high school through college students, and it's an amazing blend. And if you were in my shoes to see what they juggle and manage to do, for instance, Friday, some of them had to go do a dress rehearsal, come to our dress rehearsal in their MRD uniforms, and then get ready to go out in the cold for however many hours. It was worth it, I think, but you know, they juggle a lot, and they're doing it very well. So I am thrilled to be a part of bringing this group together. I do want to thank a few people. First of all, the lovely church for hosting us here. Massanutten Brass Band, it's always such a joy to play with that amazing group. So we're happy to share a concert with them. Some more individual help. Daisy Clute, she's not quite an official member of our team, but she might as well be. She does everything, like running to my house to get mutes when we realized that half of them were left at home for our dress rehearsal. So she's a doctoral student at JMU and so supportive. We have Hannah Carricker here, another graduate student, who wears the head of librarian, and there's a lot more than you would ever believe when it comes to a group like this. Keeping track of transposed weird parts and things like that, helping out, playing a little bit, just a big help. We have someone new. Aiden, where are you? Is he hiding? Aiden Kohler. Oh, he might be off. He's going to be up here later again. Our percussion coordinator. It takes a lot, and the Maycombers, thank you for all your help with getting all this equipment. From our rehearsal to rehearsal, we have a percussion coordinator, and it relieves me of so much so that I can focus on what I'm doing. And then lastly, Josh Holsinger, stand up over there, Josh. Wave, yes. Josh started in this band as a high school student. He has played in the JMU Brass Band. You're going to hear him in the Massanutten Brass Band. He went out and taught. He's here doing graduate studies. He is my right hand and my right arm in all of this. And his support, his thoughtfulness about things he reminds me of or thinks of, it's just an amazing support. So can we have one round for all of those helpers, please? Thank you. Our final number, what else but a finale, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy the rest of the concert. You will need to give us a little time to get all these people off and then the next group on, but again, so glad to have you with us tonight.
Thank you so very much. What a pleasure it is to be here. And I'd like to, before we go any further with this concert, to have another round of applause for the mighty Massanutten Youth Brass Band. It's a bit of a celebration season for both bands. This is the youth band's 15th year and the Massanutten Brass Band's 25th anniversary. So this is actually at the start of our 26th year. And it's really exciting having these types of groups here in the Shenandoah Valley. The group that you see before you now is the two-time North American champion in the second section of North American Brass Band Association. So this past year and the year before, this band was the #1 band in our division. So while it's kind of tiring playing all the music that we do, I'm going to do less talking and more playing. And next we're going to be playing a wonderful piece by Nigel Hess that was originally for orchestra and transcribed for brass band entitled A Christmas Overture. one tradition for many would be going to see the Nutcracker, and the band has to slip into tutus and such, and then we're going to... This is not a ballet that I've seen live, unfortunately. My daughter was excited we were going to do this because she really loves ballet and is a violinist. So, Anna, I'm sorry it's all on brass instruments, but this is what we have. She's back there shaking her head right now. So I hope you enjoy. This is a nice arrangement of 3 of the very familiar movements from the Nutcracker. The Huron carol, and in this particular setting, it's really quite a haunting Christmas tune, and it was something that was written. It's the earliest Canadian Christmas carol, originally Canadian, and it was written in the 17th century, and it was originally written in the language of the Huron people in Canada. And this setting is remarkable, and it's very somber at times and very mysterious. And parts of the carol have to do with the birth of Christ, but instead of swaddling cloths, it was like squirrel skin, and it was in a house of bark, that kind of thing. So it was taking ideas and pictures from the northern parts of Canada. So this is a lovely, lovely setting of the Huron carol. So it indeed is the most wonderful time of the year, and especially when you have a brass band to conduct, and especially when you have a marvelous tenor horn section. And especially when you have Natasha Myers playing first horn in the band. If you notice, although she changed her top and to fit in here a little bit, Natasha was playing solo horn in the youth band and is now filling in because she is not Will White, most certainly. And Will came down and was quite ill, and so Natasha, I said, hey, what do you think? And she was like, okay. And so we worked it out, and we're having a great time. She came in on one rehearsal, and the rehearsal was yesterday. And she got the music on Friday, or Thursday, yeah. And so it's been a delight having her perform with us, and one of the fun things was, I was like, can you play? And she's like, sure. And I said, oh, and one of the things is there's a horn feature. So this is a really great setting of this tune that features just our tenor horn. So if you're like, what's a tenor horn? You're going to find out. It's a gorgeous sounding instrument, and they sound just lovely together. So let's welcome our horn section is going to stand up from where they are. Let's get them up on their feet with a round of applause. In my family, the Polar Express is almost an annual event. I had one of my students tell me how creepy it is at times, and it kind of is a little, right? But I think for myself and for my wife, the thing that strikes the most is the thing about, the little boys, thinking about things, and they're like, well, it's about that time, maybe, the magic's gone. And I don't know, there's just something about that film. We even gave our son Ryan he's like, what? We even gave him an ornament, I think, that was a Polar Express ornament. This is a nice arrangement, a tough arrangement, but it has 4 of the tunes in it that you'll enjoy hearing. It doesn't have hot chocolate. I was hoping for that, but I think the band would want some refreshments during the performance, so it doesn't have that in here. So I hope you enjoy this. This is the Polar Express.
When I was in undergraduate school at the University of Illinois, the assistant band director was a gentleman, his name is Jim Kernow, and I played in a brass band that he started during the time that I was in undergrad school at Illinois, one semester. I've only ever played in a brass band for one semester, but I've been conducting brass bands for 25 years. And I feel like there was this little seed that was planted at the time, and it took me at least 15 years after I was done with graduate school to actually do anything about it. So, and Jim's background is the Salvation Army. That's where he cut his teeth. That's where he got into brass bands. And in the United States, it was the Salvation Army that kept the idea of the American brass band alive, really. Now, it has the format that you see here is modeled after the British brass band, but brass bands were commonplace early on in the history of bands, and it was the Salvation Army that kept that tradition alive in the U.S. particularly. And a lot of music that I played when I was in school, and a lot of music that we use, is stuff that's pieces that are written for that organization, and they have some really fine bands. The New York Staff Band, particularly in the United States, and in Europe, in England, in the UK, it's the International Staff Band too. Just absolutely amazing bands made up of basically amateur musicians who work for and are part of the Church of the Salvation Army. And ever since we started this group early on, 25 years ago, the very first Christmas concert we did, I wanted to do something that connected the band to that tradition, because to me that's important. There's so much music and so many great people that I've met over the years who have influenced what I do with bands, that I wanted this to be part of what we do. So this concert tonight is a fundraiser. It's a benefit for the Salvation Army here in Harrisonburg and Rockingham County, and you saw that when you came in. There's a basket out there. And if you haven't donated, please consider doing so. It's really very meaningful. It's really been great here in town at the Corps. They started buying more instruments, and kids are learning to play brass instruments, and it's really, really exciting. Dorothy Gates is a composer for brass band. She's at the Corps down in Stanton, and she's contacted me several times, and they have a band kind of going down there now. So it's really a great organization for this church and for the benefit that they do for so many people in need. So if you miss that coming in, please consider as you go out, because it's a real pleasure to be able to perform and to be able to provide an opportunity to raise money for that organization. It's been so good to have you all here. What a great crowd. Again, it's so wonderful to have a youth band
in the valley. There's not that many in the country. There might be 20 throughout the United States, and we have one of them right here in Harrisonburg. And I am so honored and privileged to have this bunch here. Some of them have put up with me for 25 years in this band. Now, it's only about 4 people now, but you know, that's the way things go. So it's really a joyful thing to be able to make music with them. We have one more piece that we're going to play, just a march medley for you to wrap up the concert. Thank you all so very much for being here. I hope you have a very happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year. Just enjoy family and fun and food. That's important to me. And just really enjoy the season. Thank you so much. So one more piece, and have a great evening. You don't, there's no encore because they're done. But I just wanted to wish you again a wonderful holiday season, and I would like us all to give a wonderful round of applause for Otterbein United Methodist Church for allowing us to perform here. Have a great evening. Thank you all.